I got some new guys down there.
What are they using for what?
Don't use water. Don't need them.
Yeah,
They don't need them. No, sir. In fact,
Its own chamber?
it's we use a packet of powder just placed in the tube. In fact, I would strongly not advise using water. What you do is you change the frequency. You don't change the decibel level. This is a low frequency, won't hurt your ears. You put a projectile or something in front of it, it just raises the frequency to the point where it hurts your ears. And it's not really the decibel. People like it, but it's not safe.
You go higher?
Especially when you get to these big guns. Anything below that?
Bench, firing.
And then the officers have a finish fight. I'm sorry? It's called a sponge bucket. The water was on the sponge end, to run it down to quench any sparks that may be down in there. Yeah. You got to remember, one of the things that you don't get the feeling for, and I can't even demonstrate it for you, is that we, for safety reasons, fire one round every 3 minutes. So things don't look like they're connected. They're a little disconnected, because we really preach to the guys today to be slow, don't run, walk, make sure everything's done deliberately and in the right manner. If we are under combat scenario, and these troops have been trained, and we could do it, but I prefer not, they were trained to fire 3 rounds a minute. When you're firing 3 rounds a minute, bringing up 10-pound projectiles doesn't sound like much until you're running with them, and a pound of powder. Every man on that crew is moving constantly. It's a never-stopping movement. One guy makes a mistake, and it breaks the rhythm for the whole team. At 3 rounds a minute, quite literally, as soon as a job was done, a man would step outside the wheel, and almost instantaneously, the gun would be fired. If you're watching that, you then see that it is a teamwork out there, and it's a constant flowing motion. Men went in, when they went in, a detachment, 200 rounds.
Ready?
I think they're both loaded now.
Ready?
Here, watch this. Here we go.
No, wait.
Here we go.
As I say, you don't need any water.
People will be calling the police now.
I think we'll. I've been invaded.
Those horses didn't budge.
Welcome back into camp. Talk to you then. Huh?
Are they going to do it again?
At 1 o'clock. Excuse me. At 11 o'clock.
Every hour? Every hour?
Yeah, every hour.
Awesome. Wonderful.
It's 10:30, so.
So no, we should be prepared to hear this all day long.
Every hour that we go on.
I got to get a tripod for the next shot. Yeah.
Can we actually work with you?
Yes, certainly.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing.
How often, now they gotta clean these, do they clean them just the way we would a normal musket? Soap and water?
Soap and water, right. We'll clean them, actually someone will clean them over the week.
Now you're going to be shooting up tomorrow also?
We start, because of Sunday, we'll start at we'll start at 12 o'clock. And then the last time we fire, depending on the crowd and the weather, 3 o'clock, and then we'll break camp and skedoodle home and try to get a good dinner.
And a good night's sleep.
Every hour.
Every hour.
So now it's 10:30, will it be 11:30?
It'll be 11 o'clock.
11 o'clock.
Yeah, we were a little late because I had new guys down there and I wanted to run through the routine, which that's what the sergeants were doing. But after this would be right on
The
the
hour
hour.
on the hour.
Right.
Until what's the last one probably?
It depends on the crowd, but 4 o'clock-ish, neighbors get a little sick of it after a while. But,
Heck with the neighbors.
well, that's what some people say.
People will be calling the police saying Ashland's
Yeah.
being invaded.
But you know,
I just said, you went 911 probably real.
Somebody's firing a gun in town.
I think we're being attacked.
That's me.
Whom?
She forgets
I
the
just,
battery.
Oh.
let me write a note, put it on the stove.
Oh, you mean for you? The only time you guys think of it is when you see me, right?
I'm sorry, I apologize.
That's okay. If you don't remember, I'll just bring it to this year's triathlon. That's all.
Ask them if they got any coffee going.
Which is when? When is it? Okay.
Before
Talk to me about it.
we start, what
Yeah.
type of thing would you like to talk about?
Basically, just want to know a little bit about the encampment, how long you've been involved in it, how often you do it, just a little bit about it like that, how you were, how you got involved in coming to Ashland.
Okay.
Okay.
This is the 150th. Okay.
Right.
Get my towns confused
Right.
sometimes.
Yeah.
This is Ashland. Yes, I'm in Ashland. Oh, this is Chicopee. Oh, okay. I did that once. What town am I in?
In fact, why don't you start off by telling us exactly what it is we're looking at?
Yeah. Describe the scene.
Explain.
All right. You want to scan over in that direction then?
I'll just tape you talking about it, and then I'll do cutaways later.
Oh, okay. All right. You're going to put it together then?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And
Exactly.
if there's something you'd like to point out in particular, we can go over to it.
No. It's up. I'll do it again. Whatever you think it just strike the
Okay.
fancy of the
All right.
town.
So describe the scene and then describe
right.
what an encampment is, how often you do this, how you got involved with the
One quick
150th
question.
people.
Yes.
If that was shooting a live shell, that gun would be jumping, wouldn't it?
That gun quite literally will jump in the air and a foot and a half
A foot and a half high.
to 2 feet straight up in the air, off the trail, and then kick back about 3 to 4 feet.
Really?
Depends on the surface.
What,
Yeah.
Then you can talk about what we just saw back there.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So you want to start off by telling us, can describe the scene of what we're seeing here at the middle school today in Ashland.
Yes. My name is Captain Sheehan. I'm the commander of the 5th Massachusetts Battery, here with the Cavalry, 1st New Hampshire Cavalry. We're here to help you celebrate your 150th anniversary, the town of Ashland. Representing artillery, we have 2 field pieces here. We'll be shooting and firing these guns Saturday and Sunday. Our camp is open to the public. Come in, talk to the men. Most of us come from the Boston area. We've been doing this. The battery's been in existence for over 30 years. And we've been visiting a lot of towns. But typically we're out, about every other weekend in various sundry capacities. We do living history, as you see here, 4 towns. We also do, for our own amusement, reenactments, if you will. We also do competitive shooting. The group, a good number of the men do a lot of research. We're also a research group into the history of artillery, in particular our battery, the 5th Massachusetts Battery.
Behind us, I see there are some cannons. Can you tell us a little bit about what that part of the reenact, what that's all about?
Well, again, we're light artillery. These are representative and really quite exactly what the 5th Massachusetts, in the original days from 1861 to 1865, these are the guns that were assigned to them. This would be a section. Originally, a battery would have 6 of these guns, but they're 3-inch ordnances. We use them, again, for competitive shooting, but and for here demonstrating how the guns were loaded and used during the time period of the war.
Are these originals, or are they just, reproductions? Reproductions.
Yes, these are reproductions. There are some parts on it that are original. But because of the nature of metals and so forth, we had new tubes made out in South Bend, Indiana. But these are exactly to the drawings. Everything is to the right size and scale and so forth. Chest, I believe this one here is the original. We do have some original equipment, again, that is used out here because it's hard to replace.
Is your group sleeping here this weekend? Are you just coming here for the day and then going home? Or tell us a little bit about your experience and what you do like in the evening.
Well, quite typically, if we're, as we are here, entertaining or trying to educate the town on artillery or cavalry, most of the folks came in Friday night, and we spend the night here. Once we're in camp, we're in camp. And we try to live as best we can to the 1800 time period. I got to admit, when the sun goes down, the captain bars come off, and it's more a group of men and women having a good time together, telling stories and so forth and so on. Do our own cooking on the fire. But it's kind of a combination of historian, living history, camping with the family. My daughter's here, which would not be unusual, by the way. As a captain, the families would visit, certainly not during combat times, but they would visit camp. It was an easy ride. Quite literally, a person could leave Boston and be in Washington, D.C. in 3 days, and quite literally be out in the field in 4 days. So it was not a hard, long trip. What we're trying to portray here, just to make things kind of the right scenario, is that it was not unusual to send a group, infantry, cavalry, artillery, back to the state they came from to recruit. And so you could say that we're here in town trying to recruit your young men to join our group and go back to the conflict. The camp is, of course, open to all the, we call them the civilians, to come in, and we have a lot of fun talking to them.
How big is your organization? How many people belong?
Well, the organization you see today has grown. We've been in the hobby for over 30 years.
Hold the mic a little lower.
Lower? Oh, sorry. Okay.
A little lower.
Our organization, the 5th Massachusetts, has been in existence this is our 35th year. Right now we have 52 members, of which at any one time you may see half of them. Not everybody can come to everything, so it's a little bit of sharing. Next weekend we'll be doing something else, and there'll be another half there. Some guys come to everything. Unfortunately, I'm one of them. Already this season, this is the 4th time we've been out. So, and we do have jobs, and we do have wives. I think I do. But anyway, this can be a very active hobby. It can be at any pace that anybody wants.
If any of our viewers out there are interested in becoming a member of your organization, what would they have to do? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
To become involved in an organization like this is really stepping forward and say you'd like to do that. We have addresses and brochures that would explain a little bit of the organization. Submitting an application, minimal dues, and voted in by the organization, by your peers. Requirement is a uniform, basic uniform to start with, and then as time goes on and you can afford more uniform or different types, we encourage that. It can get as involved or it can get as simple as you'd like to spend time with. One thing I do enjoy is having young people join. When I say young, we can't work them on the guns until they're 18 years old, and that's a state law. But we do everything up to that point, and they fall right in and treated just like everybody else. We have a civilian branch that come out and literally do what they do on their own. I happen to be a captain, and I take care of the military affairs. The women have their own organization, but they have a great time too. And they're not out here just to cook for us. In fact, I don't remember them ever cooking for us. But they do come out and share in the experience, and this is each town is an experience. It's very enjoyable. Sometimes we make some very nice friends.
So people could contact you, Captain?
Yes, they could, but I would prefer rather than doing it that way, because we like to talk to people. People have to realize that there is a certain amount of commitment. Not a strenuous amount of equipment is needed, but an understanding of what it's all about. This is run as military as possible. and come when you can, but nevertheless we encourage being active in it. As anything else, the more you put into something, the more you get out of something. But rather than just say it, invite anybody, we really like to talk to you first, so you really have a clear understanding of the kind of financial commitment for the uniforms and time commitment.
Okay.
Okay?
Do you have anything else you want to add, Paul?
Not particularly.
And position, a third person would be just a soldier in general. You don't have to worry. You can use your own name and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But as I said, we'll start back here with the limber. Most people get this confused with the caisson. You'll see a lot of people, the father brings the kids over and he says, this is the caisson. This is not the caisson. This is the limber, and this is the limber chest. The limber was kind of your all-purpose utility moving vehicle. They would attach the gun right back here on the pintle hook, this is called. Now, if we had a caisson is a separate two-wheel vehicle that also hooks up onto this. These would pull everything. They pulled the battery forge, the supply wagons, everything would be hooked up to your limber. This is the limber chest. You'll notice that we've got metal on here. For obvious reasons, there are a lot of sparks flying around, hot primers. We don't want to fire, so they made it out of copper sheeting. It's secured, so I can't open it up right now. Underneath we've got a grease bucket. Keep the wheels greased, obviously. There'd be 6 horses pulling this. Sometimes in a battle it could be as few as 2, but there would be 2 that would be actually attached to the pole horses, and there are 4 more, and they're running free. And there would be 3 drivers for each. They'd be on the left horses, riding in a saddle, and they'd have to reach over. They had a bridle for their offside horse that they would use. Down to the gun. I'm not sure how detailed you want to get. Are you more interested in the firing or?
Yeah, it's detailed as people would understand.
The general public? No, get as detailed as you want, as much as the Civil War buffs could handle.
Oh, we'll be here for a while. This is a 3-inch ordnance rifle. No I in ordnance, and I think we all tend to put the I in ordnance. It's ordnance. It's 3-inch because that's the diameter of the muzzle. This is the muzzle. The breech is back here. These are muzzle-loading guns. Everything had to go down the muzzle. During the time of the Civil War, the English had the Whitworth gun, which was a breech loader, and the Confederates had a few of them. The Union didn't believe in them for some reason or other. In a breech gun, the breech actually opens up and you introduce the round through the back. There would be around this gun 5 people. Their positions were numbered. The number 1 man is here, number 2 is here, number 3, number 4. The odd people were on the right side, except for the number 5 man, who would be on the left side. The number 5 man brought the round back from the limber chest, and he would bring it up here and put it in. He'd usually have a haversack, a leather haversack, to kind of protect it. He would bring it down around here. So I'll go through each man individually. You might want to come around and take a look at some of these implements. During the Civil War, when they fired, all they used was, I called it a wet sponge. Let me get one off for you. They weren't as concerned about safety today as it was war. We're more concerned about...
Start off
Sure.
Just tell me what that is again while you're holding it.
This is a sponge rammer. Obviously sponge end. And this is the rammer end. This is used to introduce the charge down into the breech. During the Civil War, they only used this one implement. They were using cotton bags that they just caught fire and they were gone. We use aluminum today, so we have to go in and worm them out. If I can get a worm out now, I'll show you the worm. I carried a worm during the war in case there was a misfire and they had to go in and pull the powder bag out. We use it before we fire every round to clear out the aluminum foil. And I think they've already picked it up for us. Just to make sure there's nothing in there, obstructions. These become projectiles when we fire, and we don't want anybody to get hurt. We first worm the piece, then we go in and wet sponge the way they did. But we also dry sponge. They never bother to dry sponge. Once again, it's for safety reasons. Too much water in there can cause a misfire, and we don't want to be bothered with extracting a lot of gunpowder out, especially with the public around. During all the time that number 1 is working on the gun up here, back here would be the number 3 man, and he would be what's called the vent here. It's the hole right down into the breech. He has to keep this sealed. You have to maintain a vacuum inside these guns, because if there's ever a small ember in there, the action of the sponge going in and out fans it into a flame, and you can have a misfire, which means the man out here is probably going to lose his arm. And it still happens today. Units that are not very careful occasionally work too quick, and you'll lose an arm right over there. The danger, of course, for this man here is that if it went off prematurely, he'd lose his thumb. He'd be standing back like this. He would stand back here. He had to maintain that vacuum. He would also be in charge of picking the charge when they put the bag in, and today when we put the bag in, which is aluminum, you have to pick the charge to expose the powder so that you can fire it. The number 4 man on this side has the little friction primers. I think I have one in my hat. There we go. They're basically like this, a little brass tube. There's a fulminate of mercury compound in there. When this wire is pulled out by a lanyard, it creates a spark which goes down and sets off the powder. That's number 4's. That's his job, firing the gun. He makes the big noise. The man over here, the number 2 man, he was responsible for putting the charge into the gun. He'd receive it. He'd be waiting here. Number 5 man would come down, put the charge in his hand, and he turns and actually puts it in the muzzle. That's his job. Most complicated job is, and dangerous probably, is that number 1 man there. I've already talked to you about number 4. Choreographing the whole gun is the gunner, and his position would be back here, roughly. He moved around so that he could see what he was shooting at, of course. He would give the commands to fire, to cease fire, any problems. He had to watch everybody, make sure everybody's doing their job, that there's no problem. He actually sighted the piece. He would use this elevation screw here to change the elevation of the muzzle. You go to the right and it'll raise, and the left to lower it. He also sighted, it's called a pendulum Hoosh sight. It looks a lot like your modern rifle sights, the flip-up type, and you can raise and lower. Similar here, he'd put this on here, and he'd be down just like this, trying to sight it. All the while, number 3 is keeping that clean, keeping that sealed. Unless he had to change the angle of the gun either left or right, he wouldn't do that. In that case, the number 3 man would come down here to the hand spike. He would stand like this, and depending on the direction that the gunner wanted to fire it, he would lift and turn it. And these guns are pretty well balanced, so 1 man can lift the trail himself and turn it. Very often it wasn't much. If he had to make a drastic change of angle, the men would get on the wheels and turn the wheels to bring it back. Let's go back here, because there were 2 more men back here. As I said, number 5 man was here. He brought the charge down. There were 2 men here, the 6th and 7th man. Number 6 was the ammunition fixer. He would take the charge out. They did have fuses that were timed, and he would have to set it depending on the distance that they had to fire. And he would take it and he'd put the charge down between his legs like this and actually cut it. There aren't any real records on how many men were lost that way, but that's the way they did it. There'd also be a number 7 man, and he would assist him in setting the fuses. He would also give number 5 a break if it was heavy action, and because it's quite a distance, it'd actually be farther back if we had our horses here. You get tired, so number 7 would take his place running back and forth. Overseeing the gun completely was a sergeant. He's usually mounted. He would pass on the commands that he got from his lieutenant. We had one lieutenant for 2 guns, which is called a section. There was usually 3 sections in a battery in the Union Army. In the Confederacy, it was generally 4. Toward the end of the war, Grant decreased the number of batteries in the field, and a lot of times you saw either 4 or 8 rather than 6 on there. They were overseen usually by a captain, but a lot of times the captain was promoted out in the field, and you'd end up having a senior lieutenant running the whole thing. And that's about it. Sure. If I can answer them. This is my first event of the year. You're a little brain dead at the beginning. You guys playing today?
Come on, I'm on TV. Did you win?
No, we didn't play yet. We're playing right now.
Put that in the bloopers file. You just stand
Just mooned you.
Hey.
Hey.
You just stand right before
Sure.
could you just tell me
Not yet.
before I trip? Actually, I just wanted to ask you, if this gun was in like, if this was back in the Civil War days, in an actual battle scenario, what would they be firing at? How far away? I mean, if you got troops running across this field at you from this distance,
I can tell you that.
you're only going to get one shot off before they get here, you know?
A good crew fired 3 rounds a minute.
I was just going to ask you how
That's
anticipated my question.
You could fire more if they had to, if the enemy was really getting close.
Basically, you had one gun.
Well, there'd be 6.
Oh, okay, so
Be 6 guns in the battery. Sometimes you'd only have 2 out there. If they sent a section out, it happened to the 5th Mass quite a few times. They would send one section out, just send them out to do some firing into the woods to see if the enemy was there and whatnot, so you only had 2 guns in the case. There was one point during the war where the 5th Mass was reduced to 2 guns because they had lost 4.
if each gun can fire 3 rounds in it,
A good crew back then fired roughly 3 rounds.
and you had 4 or 6 guns, you probably get a lot of shots off.
In big battles, of course, there was more than one battery. If you look at Gettysburg, there were guns all along the cemetery.
Like the modern military. You had a lot.
Oh, you had to have a lot of courage here.
Primitive.
My brother was in the artillery, and you know, you're miles back back of the line. Because during the Civil War, you didn't fire at it unless you could see it. There was no remote send. They didn't drop the Rangers in behind the line. There was none of that. So they were within 100 feet almost. These had a range. If you look at the charts, they say 2¼ miles at 16 degrees of elevation. If you look and study the battles, you'll find that most of the lines were never really more than a mile apart. And that's probably the best you could hope for with accuracy, especially since the gunner here, who's actually sighting the piece, doesn't have binoculars. He may be looking at a puff of smoke and trying to fire at it. The sergeant who's up on his horse with his binoculars, and he's watching, and he might say to the gunner, look, you're too far to the right, you've overshot the mark, you're undershooting. And then the gunner would have to use his experience to line it up. So it really, when you say range, an effective range, the range may be 2¼ miles, but the effective range was probably about a mile. If you go to Gettysburg and you look at the distance between the 2 ridges where they were stationed, with the Union on Cemetery and the Confederacy on Seminary, they're about 9/10 of a mile apart. And the Confederates still overshot. For some reason or other, the Confederates always overshot their mark. The Union was very happy that they did. These fired, this is a rifled gun, so it fired a bullet-shaped projectile, just like you put in a rifle nowadays. They also had smooth bores, which fire the traditional cannonball shape. They weren't as accurate, of course. When they developed the rifle gun, they could fire a heavier round with less powder, greater distance, and with more accuracy. These did have their limitations as far as the rounds they could fire. This gun was really designed to fire shell and K-shot. Now, shell is a hollowed out projectile and have an exploding charge in it. A K-shot would be hollowed out, but they'd also have balls, iron balls in it, and they would explode. This is what it really was designed for. It also fired a solid shot, called a bolt in this gun, and they fired canister. Canister's like a shotgun shell for a cannon. The problem with these guns, when they fired canister, is because it's rifled, the balls inside, instead of spreading like a shotgun, they tended to stay together and just kind of spin around in the air, so they didn't get the effect they wanted. Canister was used against troops that were getting in really close. When the enemy got within 400 yards or so, they would start loading canisters into these guns. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3. There's a story at Gettysburg. I forget the name of the battery. I think it was Cowan's Battery. When they pulled up into the wall up on Cemetery Ridge, the Confederates approached within 10 paces, 30 feet. They were firing double canister then, and when they fired it, there was no one left standing after they fired. So you tend to see a pink cloud go up after they went off. So very, very nasty round. But they were using smoothbore guns. Smoothbores are much nicer. They give a really good spread. It's kind of gross to talk about nice spread, but that's the way they do.
That's the reality of it.
That's the reality of war. It was not a nice war.
War is not pretty, no war.
No. Especially then.
All right, is there anything you'd like to add or anything you thought of that you'd like to talk about?
I can't think of anything else offhand. I try. This is my first event. I missed the one last week, so.
How long have you been doing this?
I've been doing this for 5 years.
Where do the spare parts come from?
There are companies actually that make these things. You have to be pretty much a blacksmith to make these parts. There are companies that make the carriages. This is the carriage for the guns.
For the historical aspect of it?
Yes, they have the original plans, and they charge big money to make these things. $6,000, $6,000. That's a few years ago. We're probably talking $8,000 to $10,000 for the wood. Then you've got to buy and have the metal made. If you're lucky enough and you've gone to a swap meet or something and you bought some original iron, all the better.
Are there a lot of these organizations throughout the country?
Yes. The Civil War is gaining popularity. It gained a lot from the Ken.
Mostly just, like, say, the east half of the country, north and south?
Oh, no. No, it goes all the way to California.
Really? Even though they
had
historically had nothing
really nothing to do. But they raised troops in California. The big battles are over here in the quote-unquote east. If you think of east of the Mississippi, west was on the other side of the Mississippi.
Right, exactly.
The biggest events, of course, now are down in Pennsylvania. There's a lot of big open spaces in the land. In 1903, we reenacted the 130th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg.
Just as safe as they are today.
I heard 9,000. It's not real.
No, this event nationally is not really a reenactment. Not the actual reenactment.
Today, no. There's nobody. We're just trying to give people an idea of artillery camp would take up a football field. It was that big. 120, 130 horses and a light amount of men.
Would a camp similar to this have been like in Ashland or in surrounding areas during that time?
In Massachusetts, I'm from Rhode Island. They had camps around Worcester and around Boston. They collected and trained men.
Central kind of.
Yeah. Now the local militia groups, they may have camped out in fields and kind of thing to make just before they went off.
Right.
Prepared to train them. If he works in a battle, he probably won't see them.
The necessary. The necessary.
But a lot of us are older guys. Older guys. There's no way I'm sleeping on this camp anymore.
Was it really damp last night? Was it damp out here last night?
Yeah. Camp now, so. Well, young guys. Average age is 24. There are groups that do it, but not this one.
Actually, it's supposed to clear up later on today. It's supposed to get really warm. So.
Oh, that's right. It's a roll.
Tomorrow's gonna be hot though. So.
Well, we get used to it. It was 103 during that battle. And people were going down with comfort.
Do you think the Massachusetts if you go?
No, we go up and down to Pennsylvania.
Oh, you have, okay.
To get people to go, say, to Florida, it's kind of tough for us. Things that they can leave out of work. And
Right. We have lives outside.
yeah, somewhat.
Do they do them in Florida though?
Yes.
They do.
Well,
So it's pretty much throughout the 50 states.
48.
48.
Yeah, I don't know of any in Hawaii or Alaska.
48. Off of the green belt. But anyhow, in your continental.
Oh,
Very interesting. Thank you guys for coming out here for part of our 150. Really cool.
glad to be here. When you're not working, come back.
Definitely.
I think we're going to fire the gun.
We're going to fire.
We're going to shoot.
I think we're going to fire.
Some
Francisco, block your right ear.
piping mixed in with it. So there was 2 crews that went right into it.
Ready! Cease firing!
Cease firing? Give your paces.
Now, what I need is
Stand the horse!
much more to this.
After you secured your pieces, number 1 and 2 go out and mark the area in front of your gun.
Anyway,
Make sure there's no smoldering embers, pieces of plastic bagging, etc.
Typically, you're talking about the address. If you look at the top of the hatch, it's all bummers. This gentleman has just a cross canvas. But other men have other symbols on the top of their hat. What he wears a Maltese cross. Maltese cross. They were typically circles, squares, Maltese crosses. There was over.
I only heard one.
Symbols represented a four. Fifth floor happened to be the Maltese cross.
Close
Now you know the artillery's in the 5th floor.
Sounded.
There's more clues. Red, white, and blue. The 4 badge red was the 1st division. Red, white, and blue will be the 3rd division. Now you know whether he's in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd division. You know he's in the 3rd artillery. There's another clue.
Home run! Cut. Right, rest. Front. From the right. Count off by 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Prepare to mount. Only the 1, 2, 3 stand.
did?
Easy, Meg.
Find a spot with a new
Right, oblique. Mark. By the left flank. Mark. Right wheel. Mark. Look to the left. Look to the left. The other left one. You're ahead of me. You're ahead of me. Look to the left. You don't go to the left. That's this way. Look to the left. Forward. By file. Art. Countermarch left. Mark. Prepare to draw sabers. Draw. Sabers. Guard. Left. Point. Right. Point. Rear. Point. Against infantry. Front. Point. Left. Cut. Right. Cut. Front. Cut. Right about. Cut. Come on, get line. Move it. circle, right? March! Forward! In circle left! March! Forward! Left into line! March! Return! Sabers! Right. All right, dress up the line. There you go. Spot.
I think they're going out on Concord last Saturday and the Saturday before. Both, Jonathan and Joe. I got to see both.
It's a nice shot of the camp from here.
Whoa, there's horse prints in the ground.
He had a perfect shot of horses. It's very hard to get good shots here. So I was trying to get a shot where it didn't happen. And there's this
I know. Third bed's like, now what do you do? I'm going to bed.
yeah, the soccer
Must have
thing.
been through osmosis. Where'd we go? I don't understand how it happened. I said, Dennis, how did it happen? I never seen it had one car.
It's like a rifle book. This is a rifle gun. Yeah. So it's long. It's
They all, our uniforms, everything are made by either Jonathan or Quartermaster. They hold the patents to the original uniforms, you know, like the hats. They hold the patents. So when you order it, you order 7.5 or 7.25. They have the patent, the original patent.
You strike me as a cotton jockey.
Yeah.
Oh,
Did he say anything about all those messages I left on his machine? Lexington. He's feisty. He's warm from all that running.
Yeah. They worked up a little bit because of the cannon fire.
Oh yeah. They seem to be
around for a second.
He just won't stand for that.
They seem to be pretty calm during it all, but
Yeah, they get used to it.
Yeah.
Somewhat.
yeah.
And it depends on the day.
Okay, basically what we wanted, we got a lot of shots of the drills that you just did. So if you wanted to tell us a little bit about them and what you do, a little bit about this whole encampment and enactment.
The
From your
cavalry
point.
was issued a carbine, Sharps carbine, which we were issued, a Colt revolver, and a saber. And we just saw the saber exercises for when we're fighting with the sabers. And we didn't do a pistol charge or a carbine charge, but that's basically what we're doing.
Is this somewhat authentic from the period drills, or something that they would have done during that time?
Yes, it is. They drilled a lot, an awful lot. They had to, and their lives depended on it. We're going to have a saber fight out here in a minute.
Okay.
If you want to get pictures of that.
Okay. Want to try to talk to someone else? Yeah. Want to try to talk to somebody else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Careful though.
Yeah, really. Do you have a minute? Sure. We're with a local cable and we're doing a story, a piece on the whole encampment, and we have a lot of footage of the your cavalry drill. Can you just tell us a little bit about the cavalry and
We're the 1st New Hampshire Cavalry.
Okay, wait a minute. Wait,
We're
please.
from all over. We're the 1st New Hampshire Cavalry.
Rebel horsemen!
Oh, rebel horsemen! Gotta go get him.
Get that man! Get that rep! Get him, Captain! Come on, you cowardly! Yeah, just do it round the track! Yeah. Go get him! Somebody got that man! Go after him! Keep the pointer! Baxter! Baxter, Curry! Number 1 gun, take care of that rebel. Throw him on, Curry. Canister about 5 feet. Keep the pointer.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was I in your way? Jack, you gonna be here for a while? Okay, don't go away because we want to.
Stop stroking the mic like that.
Oh.
Make it...
Sorry.
Where's the mic on?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's my fault. I forgot to. I should have told you.
Sorry about that.
They keep fighting. I can get some more footage, hopefully.
So bad, I'm sorry.
Get after him, boys.
Oh, but I mean my. Oh. Sorry about that.
I got him with my mug. That's the way I dressed him. You go to the cop. Yeah, and then whack him over the head with the mug. I want to make sure he's dead.
Over the event, you'll use the fire in a big event that might be.
Can you tell us all that on the microphone, on the camera? On camera?
Mic test card?
Yeah. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1.
through here. I had to shorten up my...
At the party?
I chaperone.
Oh, no wonder you feel like the way you do.
At events like this, we're firing a little bit, and the horses are a little bit nervous. But they've been conditioned at large events. There might be 2,000 or more people all firing rifles and cannons being fired at the same time. And they're really not a lot worse. They're a little bit jumpy, but they're kind of used to it.
Can you explain what some of the exercises that we're going through today, like the saber?
The drill we're doing is from a Civil War period manual for cavalry. It's called Cook's Tactics for the Cavalry of the United States. So the formations we take, the saber drill is all from that manual. She's still a little bit nervous. We try to be as correct as possible. Of course, in the real Civil War cavalry formations, the groups were quite a bit larger. A group like ours is a company, and a company might be about 100 to 120 men. We have mounted, at some events we'll have 12 mounted cavalry. There are always a lot more infantry and artillery at the big reenactment events than there are cavalry, only because it's a lot more to get into a cavalry situation. You've got to buy a horse, you need a trailer, you need a truck to travel around in, so it's quite a bit more expensive than an infantryman who would just buy a tent and a pack and a musket and he'd be all set. So around the country there really aren't all that many mounted cavalry units. They tend to be more so down south rather than up north.
What was the role of the cavalry?
The cavalry were the eyes and ears of the army. The cavalry scouted around the sides, around the flanks of the army, scouted out ahead to get a good idea of where the enemy was and what kind of numbers he was in, how he was deployed. So without air reconnaissance, without really any way of telling where the enemy was, the cavalry was the only way. The cavalry could move 4 times as fast as the infantry could. A good cavalry group could move 35 miles in a day, and that'd be a real hard march for infantry. On some days, the cavalry went up to 100 miles. During the Civil War, life was hard for horses. 100 miles travel in a day on a horse would very nearly kill a horse, and a lot of horses did just drop dead from the exertion. This is just a game for us, and we take it pretty easy on the horses.
Now, the cavalry also went out west.
Yeah, that was mostly after the Civil War, when the West was expanding, settlement to the Midwest and Far West was happening. So most of the cavalry movies you see depict that era where the cavalry were fighting Indians and other such folks. Prior to the Civil War, there was really very little settlement in the mid and far west, and the Indians weren't too agitated. It was only when real heavy settlement occurred after the Civil War into the late 1860s and into the 1870s and 80s that the battles with the Indians were fought.
During the Civil War, did the cavalry work in conjunction with the infantry,
Yeah.
or were they a separate unit?
Towards the end of the Civil War, the cavalry started operating in much larger groups independently of the infantry. But earlier in the war, they were just an arm of the infantry and were commanded by infantry commanders. So they would act a lot like a reconnaissance battalion, reconnaissance platoon would act today, trying to feel out the ground, feel out the enemy. It was very important during the Civil War. The position you took was very important. There were no helicopters, there was no artillery that could dislodge you. If you took high ground, anchored on both sides by, say, a ravine or a river or something like that, it was really very difficult to dislodge troops like that. Whereas today, lots of artillery would be called in, airstrikes would be called in. Back then, if you held the good ground, you usually won the day. So it was important to find the good ground, and the cavalry did that.
The drills that you were doing out there today, were those drills that they would have actually done in training?
Yeah, in training, yeah. A good cavalry troop, they say would take 2 years to train, and that's 2 years working 6 days a week. All they did was train. They'd keep the Sabbath, but the rest of the days they'd train. We get together a few times a month, so you can't expect the level of expertise from us that you would from the cavalry during the war. Also, we're kind of old and fat, and the troopers during the war were young and thin. A typical trooper would be a 140-pound guy in his early 20s, just hard as nails.
Now, did you
just like Sergeant Goodwin, similar to that.
Do any research, like for characters?
Yeah, we don't portray specific characters, but there was a 1st New Hampshire cavalry that operated during the war, and we're kind of loosely based on them, Company K of the 1st New Hampshire Volunteer Cavalry. Earlier in the war, the New Hampshire Cavalry fought with the Rhode Island Cavalry, the 1st Rhode Island, that was actually part of the Rhode Island Cavalry. In 1864, the New Hampshire cavalry became independent and fought through most of the battles of 1864 till the end of the war.
Did the New Hampshire cavalry just maintain battle fields in the north, or did they take battles in the south?
They operated primarily in the eastern part of Virginia, Shenandoah Valley, right, and the wilderness, Spotsylvania, the later battles of the war that led up to the surrender at Appomattox from the spring of 1864 to the spring of 1865 was when they did most of their fighting. And most of it was in what was called the Eastern Theater of Operations, that is, not Georgia, not Tennessee, but in Virginia.
That's where most of the war was fought.
Right.
Between Washington, D.C. and Richmond.
They're really very close together. There's only about 100 miles or so between Washington and Richmond.
All that area around
They were
Virginia
trying to
and
defend
Maryland.
Washington.
Right, and the south of Virginia.
You guys have seen the Ken Burns.
Yeah,
That's very
right,
cool.
I have the film for Black's, half a dozen times. There's
Is that
also,
good preparation for, like, when you're going out to do something like this?
we're all kind of history buffs, so we all, to a greater or lesser degree, read books on the Civil War, watch the films like the Gettysburg film was really very good. Ken Burns films, of course, are very well done. Shelby Foote's three-book series on the Civil War, pretty much everyone has read, and that's pretty much known as the definitive text on the Civil War. Well, these horses are nervous today, huh?
They don't
like the camera very much.
Sometimes, you know, at certain places we go, it just seems like the place makes them nervous. Other places they
There
seem
you
like
go.
calmer.
we want you to like Lost Land, you pretty horses.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice place.
You know what I'm saying?
This is Ginger. She's been doing this for a year. She's teenage, about 13, 14 years old. Most of the horses are older rather than younger horses. The younger horses are just too hard to control with the noise and the distractions. Much too frisky, yeah. You know, we do parades and things where there are a lot of people, a lot of visual inputs and sounds that a younger horse would shy away from. She doesn't like manhole covers. She hates manhole covers. She doesn't like stepping on those. She's, you know, quiet, gentle, pretty friendly horse.
Ginger, yeah.
What time is it now?
It's 12.
Jamie! Blue!
Just one can of this.
You're going to throw us out. Are you sure it's clean? I don't really trust it. Number 5s. Judgment number 1! Well, one is chatting with number 5.
Your sergeant talk to my sergeant?
We'll do lunch.
We have to do lunch someday. Yes.
I had a great time, and I really feel, and I thought she covered it.
Jack. Here, I don't know if these are probably.
They said to come up and respond.
Yeah, that's great.
Should have brought a bunch of people with them.
I made an idiot out of myself.
So what's new, right? What's new? So what's new, huh? At least I can do it in the privacy of my home, not on TV. Hey, listen, I have some blackmail pictures of you.
Are you as wet as they look?
I know you.
Are you as wet as you look?
Yeah.
Just from being in the grass?
Yeah, I was kneeling down in the field over there and stuff.
Okay. 20 pounds and I'll go on TV anytime you want.
Because the TV will put it back on.
That's right, they will.
You know something? That
Yep.
battery.
Did you get to do both lines this year?
Yep.
It's down in the wire.
The day I talked to you, a call from Boston said we're about to close Boylston Street down. Can you come in right away? So what are you going to say?
Yeah.
Boylston Street was dry when I got there, so we just started painting. They already had the base down.
Jesse, they're secure.
We went to look at it, and we couldn't even get close to it, but we saw all these people in front of the church out there. We wondered what's going on. All these cameras are waiting outside the church. Couldn't figure out what's going on. So finally, somebody comes out. I think it must be a politician or something. Guy gets in the limo, and he rolls down his window. It's Dennis Hopper.
And Boylston Street.
Yeah.
Same day.
He was there the day I painted the finish line.
Yeah, it was that day.
Oh, you were in Boston?
Later on that day.
What are you, one of them Matthew Brady fellas? The hell is this? One of them new box cameras?
Shoot it!
I didn't be from Vermont.
Shoot it!
I didn't
You
see
know
no
it, shoot it!
didn't see no flash powder, nothing.
No, I know it.
God almighty, we look at that, boys.
Doing some freelance.
It must be French, you know. Everything like this comes from France. Oh yeah, them French boys. Pretty weird.
Yeah.
What, no big black blanket to hang under? Let me see. I'll check it.
All right, Dave. What's new? Tell you how to wash yourself.
That's dead as a doornail.
I put the wrong one. John Bargain does that.
That's it.
Yeah, you can't be wrong.
Thank you.
And that weren't easy.
Don't dispose of in the fire, though.
I thought that they were. I thought they were. They were thrown in the bag. Dead ones were thrown in the bag. Probably because
How long do you get out of a battery?
Those? Not long. Maybe like one shoot. Yeah, one shoot.
We're getting a whiskey barrel, so that's
What are you going to talk about, so I'm semi-prepared?
Well, your involvement in how you came up with how you came up with the idea, or what was involved in getting them.
Would you say that Charlie came up with the idea? And you know what? I think I had referred to this at one point as a Revolutionary War encampment. Not today, not recently, but when we first started talking about it, if you look in the old minutes. So I'm glad to know it's really Civil War.
Right. I think you might have.
What's the difference?
I think I might have been there that day you said that. Because I say, why are we doing something for the Revolution?
I know.
The Civil War areas.
We weren't even here in the Revolution. I mean, Ashland wasn't.
Ashland wasn't, no. Weren't even thought of.
Right.
Nope. Concord and Lexington.
Is it on?
Yeah, it's on now. It's no, it's videotape.
No, it's SVHS tape. Similar to VHS tape, only it's SVHS, which stands for Super VHS.
It's adaptable
To VHS? Yes, it is.
I am the battery store.
Only if you talk to us. Only if you talk to us on camera.
Oh, you're tough, Paul.
I would do more than that, but
yes.
we're not being recorded.
Not
right at the moment.
Fine. Fine. What would you like? I'm not above prostitution. I mean in the generic sense.
Unclothed on your head at the mess deck.
No, no, that's no one wants to see that. Not even my wife, which is unfortunate, but that's
Not
all.
even my wife, he says.
Maybe if you could kind of stay in character and tell me about like the encampment.
Yeah.
And just what you guys do here.
Particular? I mean, in character, meaning 1860s.
Yes.
Right. Right.
Okay. Well.
As if you were
totally
as if you were recruiting a soldier or something like this.
You're gonna be a recruitment camp.
Look, yeah, we'll get you in a minute, okay?
Yeah, I'm gonna run down and visit those portable.
Okay. Okay. You be back. Those portable. Oh, those portable. Okay. You can look at me like you talk to me like you're recruiting me, but I'm not gonna be on camera. But
stand over camera.
yeah.
In one step.
In.
Yep. And just hold the microphone towards him.
Okay. Yes.
Yep. Okay.
So I understand you want to join the battery. Well, that's a darn good thing. A lot better than the cavalry and a lot better than the infantry. I used to be in the infantry. You don't want to do a lot of walking and stuff like that. At least you get to ride on the horses here. And usually we got good food and we got our own tents. You don't have to sleep on the ground unless you want to. And none of us want to. That's all right. And it's not too bad a life. Dangerous sometimes, but it's a lot of adventure. And our captain's a pretty good guy, I guess. I don't know. When I came down from New Hampshire to join the group, I didn't really know what I was getting into, but there are a lot of really nice guys. I made a lot of friends, and proud to fight for my country. Beat those damn rebs back there, where they came from. And proud to be here. Proud to be an American.
Jess, let's go to the bathroom.
Hope you join.
Okay. Just send me what the
About
layout.
as fast as I can wing it.
Okay.
That was good enough.
John Wayne,
Before you do anything, he
And
did win.
this
He
is-
did win the
and-
company's Lion
and this is-
Championship.
and this is
So anything he probably
Oh.
told you was probably tainted.
No, he's not here today. But this is my wife. I like to meet my wife, Betsy.
It's my turn to be the old lady.
Oh, yeah. Away from home for a while.
No, the real
That's
the real
right.
company liar is not here this weekend. He was Mr. Hickey.
Oh, Mr. Hickey, that's right. Yes, we gave that.
You want me to tell us
This
a
is
little
not
about the
still on,
camp,
is
right?
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're waiting for the follow-up comments.
Great.
You want me to tell us a little bit about the camp?
Oh, yes,
Can
I'm
you just
sorry.
tell me about the
I'm
camp
sorry.
itself
I
and tell
beg
me
your
how it,
pardon. I didn't.
About life in the camp.
how it
and-
relates to an authentic.
Well, despite what people think, we don't spend most of our time in battle. Something's going on. We, on the average, fight maybe one day out of every 30 or 40. So we spend a lot of time in camp. We spend a lot of time marching all over the countryside, but it's not too bad. Of course, when we left Massachusetts, there were about 150 of us, and now towards the end of the war, 65, or the beginning of 65, there were only about 110, 120. Most of the guys died from disease. A lot of dysentery, a lot of stuff like that. But it's not too bad when the weather's dry. And we got pretty good food. Best part about artillery is that we are self-sufficient. We carry our own stuff with us, and we don't have to wait for supply wagons like the infantry does and things like that. They keep us pretty well supplied with clothes and socks and blankets, and that's all we really need. We can always forage the countryside, but we do all right.
Okay.
Okay, great.
You've earned your tape.
That's right.
Thank you.
And
Thank
I will
you.
give
Appreciate
you
that tremendously.
a card and you can just mail me.
I'll give you one of Denny's cards. You can mail it to him or something.
Okay, you can. Yep, and you can just mail
We'll
us.
come down and get it. Whatever is convenient for you. Really appreciate this
Yep, just
tremendously.
mail us a new VHS tape, and we'll make a copy for you.
Oh, fine.
Okay.
I don't want to flip anyone out.
No. How much was it? $39.
But you know, if you
I
had
think
a
it's
big,
worth
if
it,
you had a
but-
big turnout, it would be.
Yeah.
Because when you hire a band to play in a parade, you get 3 or 4 numbers from them, and
Yeah.
sometimes you can pay $1,500
Do you think
for
it's
a
the
band.
weather today that?
No, I think it's lack of publicity.
Oh.
We really didn't push the publicity side. And
Well,
if-
Joe just gave us a notice just like a few days ago, so it really wasn't.
Yeah.
Didn't have much time to air in the.
We really got to work on our PR in the committee. Get someone that really wants to promote things.
Mhm.
Maybe this time between now and our next event to really push the next event, which is obviously the time capsule.
No, that would be a big one to promote.
And really, the schools are doing that. Or, they're kicking in a plug covering that box.
Do you want to put in a plug for PR?
That we're looking for a PR person.
Or do you want to just?
I don't want any negatives like we
Okay.
should have had more PR because the present PR person will take offense if she sees
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Although that's what we need secretly. We need someone real more aggressive.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have taken much. A little spot in a couple of newspapers. And,
Call Dwight. Call Ethan.
yeah.
They would have. They would have. I'm surprised they're not here to do a story.
Maybe
And if
they don't even know.
They probably don't. They probably don't. Because I know they're always looking for. I know, really.
Yeah, right. The last guy pulled it.
Can you tell us a little bit about the encampment and how it came about?
Well, when we were planning all the activities around the 150th celebration, we hoped to plan one event a month from March to September, and culminating with Ashland Day, the big parade, fireworks at night. So this was actually Charlie Backstrand, a committee member's brainstorm. He said we really need a military encampment. It'd be educational, it'd be something for the kids to pick up on, and it really has been his baby all along. He's kept in contact with these folks. It expanded from, we were going to have cavalry and infantry, now we have cavalry and artillery, light artillery. It's light only until you're standing 20 feet from the cannon, then you realize how heavy the artillery is, but it's been impressive with the cannons going off all day. And the cavalry took off and took a ride to the War Memorial downtown and came back again. They reenacted a rebel riding through the camp, and several officers went after them. They had sword fights. It was kind of neat.
What was involved in getting the group to come to Ashland?
Early notification because they have a busy schedule starting the good weather right up until fall. So Charlie got a hold of these folks about a year ago and cemented the date, and then we just kept in contact with them, and as the date neared, there were some cancellations in terms of who was going to show up, and we're very fortunate to get the cavalry at the last minute. They saved the day again.
What would you say the highlight of the encampment is?
Well, I watched them set up last night, and it looked pretty much business as usual. People do drive vehicles to get here, and they do unload horses from modern-day trailers. The highlight for me was pulling in this morning with no vehicles showing. This looked like you rewound the tape, 150 years ago. This would, in fact, be 15 years after Ashland was incorporated as a town. So this could be like the beginning of Civil War. And driving up to the school, you kind of forget you're on the school grounds. You really feel like you're in the middle of the Civil War.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add, tell the viewers about this, or something about the committee in general?
Well, I'd encourage everyone to participate either by attendance or involvement with all the other events coming up. We have several, and we'll be listing a calendar of events in both local papers. We encourage a lot of people to come. These are free of charge. You could contact the committee if they'd like to make a donation, but there's no obligation. People can come through. It's an educational experience, and I think it ties in with the history of Ashland.
Would you like to tell us what some of the other events coming up are?
Yeah, in June we have the classes at the schools are going to get involved with burying a time capsule. My latest word, or the latest word I received, was that it will be open in 50 years and then reburied for another 50. That's in June. We also have
Are we editing? My mind draws a blank. What else is in June?
The torch.
Okay. Take two?
Take two.
Also in June, we have the Olympic torch coming through town. The Olympic torch will be taking the route of the Boston Marathon, and certainly being the second town along the course, we'll get our fair share of Olympic recognition. In July, we're kind of taking the month off because a lot of families are on vacation. July seems to be a heavy vacation month. In August, we'll have an Indian powwow at Stone Park, August 18th, I believe it is. I could check the date on that, but keep posted for the schedule. In September, the big parade, Ashland Day Parade, bigger and grander than ever. Ashland Day itself, we hope to be bigger and grander than ever. At night, we'll have fireworks, weather permitting, and sometime that weekend, the firemen's muster. From local fire departments come around and have a competition.
Well, it certainly sounds like a fun-filled, packed year, and we do thank the Ashland Day Committee for everything that they've done.
I'd like to thank Ashland Cable for being here at every event. Thanks.
Thank you.
Second. Okay, good.
I'm the camp laundress. There were 3 attached to our unit, and when the unit was encamped for some period of time, that's why you see all this tentage around here, the supply wagons would catch up and then they could set up these tents. And at that point, the laundresses and the extra personnel could be moved up into the camp area. At that time, I would be responsible for washing all the clothes, doing all the mending, preparing food, comfort items such as that. I was paid by the military, by the U.S. government, taken directly out of the soldiers' pay. So right now what I'm doing is I was looking for my sewing kit so that I could continue putting on my first sergeant stripes. He just had a field promotion. He went into town and procured himself some red tape to lay along the outside of his trousers, and he has commissioned me, he's hired me to put those on for him. So that's what I'm about to do.
Must have been tough to be the only woman in a real Civil War camp, you know?
Yeah. Well, they
must have traveled with
I think it was very much looked down upon.
Mm-hmm.
You want to say that on camera?
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to use the shotgun mic.
Oh, okay. Let me shut this off.
I like to think of myself as a living historian. We enjoy history and we portray it by living it. You know, we can't do all the things they did. You know, we draw the line at lice and dysentery and things like that, real bullets. But a lot of the stuff, the camp life, we try to make as authentic as possible. Yeah.
I feel like you understand, like when you read about living in the camps after reenactment.
You read a man's diary or his account of things of that nature. We've been in Virginia to reenactments when it rained, and the boys talk about Virginia mud. And it's true, it's like concrete. I mean, it dries and it's deep and it's tough. It's incredible stuff. And you get more of an understanding of what they were talking about in their diaries.
Do you watch a lot of history films in preparation for something like a reenactment?
I find films aren't all that historically accurate. So some of us went down and did Gettysburg in '92, the movie, and they were very good with it, but they took a little bit of license with historical who served in the 1st Minnesota. I don't know how he got to Minnesota from Maine to serve, but it's kind of unusual. He went through the entire war, was wounded at Gettysburg type of thing. But he tells about the heat and the mud and the bad food. And you know, you get an idea of what they carried in their packs, you know, that sort of thing. And it's, yeah, those of us that get very serious, it gives you a better understanding. I mean, it's like anything. We have folks that take it right to the nth degree. I know guys that literally watch their weight so they can look thin enough to be authentic. Their clothes, I mean, most of our clothes, they're not washed for weeks, months at a time. I got a pair of pants, my infantry pants haven't been washed in 2 years. I mean, you know, when I'm wearing those, it's
the way it's being authentic.
It's kind of neat, yeah. Wool in the summer, wool in August is interesting. You know, it's amazing stuff. But and then the little things like the you know, the diaries, the photographs, the personal touches that these men were people first, soldiers next. Most of them were volunteers. And their philosophy was, we're here to do a job, then we're going home. We're not regulars, don't treat us that way. And yet a lot of the men, my great-grandfather was in the 1st Maine Cavalry. This is him on the sitting. This is just before he was wounded in Virginia in '63. But you know, they were there to do a job, and then we're going to do a job, we're going home. You know, let us alone. And they called themselves veteran volunteers, and they were very proud of that fact. You know, let the regular army do what they do. So it became a matter of honor for some of these fellas, you know. And you read about it too. And then afterwards, when the war ended, they began to form the GAR post, the Veterans Post, for that time. And because memories fade, the horror and the sickness, and you know, for every 10 men that died, 8 died of disease. Only 2 died maybe in battle, wounds, that sort of thing.
So yeah. What were the conditions like? Why did so many men die from diseases?
Well, no, you're right on the edge of science and germs. They had no conception of what germs were. They thought malaria, yellow fever, and things like gangrene were caused by, they call it miasma, which was bad air. So if they built a hospital in Washington along a fetid swamp, they would close the shutters at night so the bad air wouldn't get into the hospital to kill these guys. And the men, you know, and then somebody started seeing a correlation between the men that were in the tents outside getting fresh air and sunshine versus the men inside who were being closed up at night. And they said, well, wait a minute, maybe something's wrong here. And they actually tried to keep the windows open, and the men accused them of trying to kill them off to get more beds for the incoming wounded. And they would light smudge pots and everything in the hospitals to keep the windows open so these guys wouldn't do it. Surgeons had no concept of disease. They would set up in a barn, a hospital. They could do an amputation in about 11 minutes. They call it a guillotine style. Wipe the scalpel under boot, next man, keep on going. The same rag dipped in water to cleanse the wound. You know, just rudimentary science. They had no concept of disease. If a man developed laudable pus on a wound, it was a good sign. You know, that's what they were thinking. They were still, in some cases, bleeding people. You know, letting of blood to make them feel better. A lot of men coming from the country had no concept of hygiene. When they first would set up camps, if the men relieved themselves, they did it anywhere. Until they said, no, you know, you don't understand. You've got to use the men call them sinks. Today's modern thing would be a latrine. But these men would literally use a stream and then bathe and cook in the water from downstream. No concept. It was typhoid. Men died of measles, the common cold, diarrhea was prevalent. And to give a man, one of the cures for diarrhea was a thing called the blue mass. And it was literally a diuretic agent. They figured if they flushed the body, it would make it better. What they were doing was dehydrating and killing people. So men died like flies.
Would you say more men died from disease?
Most assuredly. Oh yes. Again, a ratio of probably 8 to 2. I mean, men died. Men coming from rural areas that never had measles, mumps, chicken pox, things of that nature. You put them into a camp with 10, 20, 50,000 men, they began to develop childhood diseases that none of them in the rural areas like Maine, where I come, had ever seen. And they were decimated by it. You could have a smallpox epidemic sweep through a camp. Typhoid, bad water was very, very prevalent. And they didn't have a clue as to what, you know, how to prevent this stuff. It was pretty sad. I mean, science was just in its infancy in that respect. But, I mean, I don't know how some of these guys survived. They were hardy people. They talk later in life of rheumatism, headaches, you know, the wounds troubled them for years afterwards. You don't read much about nightmares and you know, that sort of horror. I don't think psychiatry was well known those days, but I think most men suffered from bad dreams and, you know, the horrors of war. I mean, to stand there on a gun like that and see the 2 men beside you literally blown up and keep on going, I mean, it's got to affect a human being. It has to, you know. But those men that came in and as I said, those that could read and write and wanted to better themselves would would study at night, try to go through the ranks as a non-com. They used to elect a lot of their officers instead of appointing them. Sometimes it might have been the guy from next door, and maybe he didn't have a lot of common sense at home, so he's trying to lead them in a battle, and he gets half the men killed the first time out. Odds are he's not going to be an officer very long. They either take him out or he's taken out one way or the other. Captain didn't hear that, did he?
When I first came over, you had that book out. Could you tell me about that?
Yeah, this is Hardy's Tactics. It's the rifle and light infantry tactics, and what it is, it's a textbook really. It's the Army's version of how to do things. It's how to train people, how to march, how to do your pack and everything. And again, the men that had ambition or that could read, if they wanted to advance to be a corporal, a sergeant, or possibly an officer down the line, they had to study this. You don't just come into the ranks and take over a company. It's very difficult to do. You've got to know how to take a group of men, say 3 detachments of men, maybe 60 people, and get them from point A to point B in some sort of semblance of order. The guns, if we were doing a drill in the guns, each man has a position. They're numbered 1 through 8. You have to know if number 1 man is killed, who takes over. If number 2 man takes over, who takes his spot. The Army figured everything out, and most of it are in these books. And the men, again, the men that wanted to, the officers would put on schools in the evening in their tents, and they would help them study. They helped them teach them to read. A lot of the men were obviously religious. They came from religious backgrounds. They formed prayer groups. Some of them had moving churches, that went along right with the regiments and that sort of thing. So there were ways to keep themselves busy. The Army hated men sitting around doing nothing. If all else failed, they drilled, and they drilled, and they drilled, and they drilled. Because in the wintertime, the men went into camp, permanent camps from, say, usually late November to early spring, because you couldn't fight in the wintertime in those days. They had to keep the men busy. They made them police the camps, they made them drill. It was just picket duty. The men went out onto picket duty to watch for the enemy. And they slept in sometimes 4 to a tent in the wintertime. Each man carried a half. These are called dog tents. Each man carried a half. In the wintertime, 4 men would get together so they could button up the front and the back. Each man had a rubber blanket and a wool blanket. That way you had 4 blankets to share. And they slept in a spoon fashion, similar to this. So if one man turned, everybody turned. That way you share your everything, your warmth, your lice, your diseases, your body odors, all that sort of stuff. You don't see it in real photos, but there's one famous photo of a regiment bathing in a river in Virginia, and they're like farmers. From the neck up, they're brown. And these men spent 7 days a week, 24 hours a day outdoors. Between the wood smoke and the dirt and the sun, they were very brown, and the rest of them were lily white, because modesty in those days was very much the norm. Men would share, they would partner up with a good friend, they called them pards. And jokingly, one was the wife, one was the old man, one was the old woman. That's how they worked. But they shared everything. And if a man's partner was killed, a lot of them went into they literally went into depressions. Some of the veterans didn't want new friends, because the new guys coming in, they didn't know any better, and most of them got killed. So a lot of these guys went solo after a while. But it's they depended on a lot of things from home. They would ask for folks to send them stuff. It may or may not get there. Sometimes they're paid. They weren't paid sometimes for months at a time. They were moving all over Virginia and the South, and a lot of times the pay never caught up with them. So, a lot of hardships. I don't understand sometimes how they did it. And they came home, and some of these guys lived into their 90s. Some lived to be 100. I don't get it. We go for 2-3 days at a time. We get wet sometimes. We get dirty. We get smelly for 3 days. We go home, take a shower, clean clothes. We're back in reality. Not for these fellas. They spent most enlistments for 3 years, and until you were shot, starved, or captured, as they called it, that was it. You didn't go home. My regiment in Maine, the 3rd that I belonged to, we left Augusta, Maine in April of '61 with 1,010 men. By the time of Gettysburg, just over 2 years later, we mustered 326 men at Gettysburg. The rest all were mostly disease. Some men couldn't take it, they were invalided out, but most of them died of disease. After Gettysburg, we were down to 140 men. A year later, there were 70 left. And you know something? The majority of those men re-enlisted to finish the war. I do not understand. But they were veterans, they were full of pride. We're going to finish it. Who's ever left, we're going to finish it. And some of them were killed the last weeks of the war at Appomattox and Sailors Creek. And very few got home alive. I mean, those that did were, as I said, scarred for life, physically or mentally. So when we do this, we say we honor their memory so that people don't forget, people understand. You know, we don't glorify war. We try to show people how it was, because this was our Civil War. Every country has one. I mean, that was a pivotal point in this country. We could have been two nations. The men say all for the Union. We must remain as one. It gets pretty nice sometimes in the evening. We sing, patriotic stuff, Civil War things. And, every once in a while, we call it a magic moment. Things just gel at a reenactment or a battle, and for a second, it's almost like you were there. And then, jet goes over. They break the moment. But I've been in places in Virginia, in the woods, with a bunch of lads. We do a first-person impression where we take on an identity, and we stay in first person as long as we can. And it just, the hair on your neck just goes up. It's like, oh, we almost had it. We had it for just a minute, and then, then it goes. But
no, I mean you.
It's a great hobby. It's a great interest. It's not for everybody, but maybe we need counseling. I don't know. But I have an older brother, a younger brother, I should say, that his idea of a good time is he went to some sort of meeting in New York City with his wife, and it was tux and champagne and some sort of awards banquet, and he said this was great. And I looked at him, I said, isn't that strange? Two brothers, same family. One can go to Virginia, wrap up in a rubber blanket, and lay on the side of the road in a ditch and think he's in heaven, and the other one's standing there with champagne and a stem glass and thinking this is it. I mean, that's a hell of a contrast.
And I heard that main reason.
I mean, it takes all kinds.
Right. Yeah.
But that's what we do. Some of these are living histories. Sometimes we actually go and do reenactments of battles. My infantry regiment is in Virginia right now doing the Wilderness, and there's going to be approximately 8,000 to 10,000 people there, and that makes for an impressive 40 cannon. We've got 2 here. You can imagine 40 cannon and 8,000 muskets going off. It's pretty neat. Everything is just very, very, very stimulating, very thrilling. So I've talked enough.
2 days later, and I
Good job, lads. Sure was.
One shot and we're all dead.
Drag me out of the way and put me right in the front. Thanks, guys. Okay, I get it. Sergeant!
You're not at the school anymore, right?
Oh, yeah.
Big flags.
That was awesome. Two good hit.
Yeah.
Post. I didn't know that. I didn't know that until you said that.
Oh, yes, right. I just telling her that my uniform.
It's not the run of 30 feet. I'm sorry, buddy. I was desperate. I said everything. You're easy, dude. I go, whoa. Slipped in harmony.
I didn't know that thing flying around corners. It's pointing over here.
Go take a dip in the pond.
Goes everywhere. We two operators went down
Why
anyway.
don't you tell these guys they're going to pay for the cleaning and say horse shit?
Yeah, right. Have name it to us. You like that? I like your reading.
You know, it took 90 pounds to let you go.
Yeah, that was me. You got us all over there.
Hey, Jeff, hi there.
What? They all died.
Oh,
well.
Great gun.
Hey, where'd we get that magic canister?
Are you secure?
Yes, we are. Where's my magic sponge rammer combination over it and turn it into the...
That was a bank shot, I guess they got us with.
That was the shotgun shot.
Yeah.
Nice work, guys. Hey, number one pull through, right?
Special on the track attachment number.
Oh, didn't he?
Yeah, you did really you didn't. Huh? I would have rolled you.
I was dusting them up. I got all of my hands.
That was good, Jeff.
I told him to see the cowboys about the cleaning bill because it's theirs, you know? Yeah. Nobody's going to eat this anyway.